Imagine for a moment that you held the power to solve one of a nation's most profound and persistent problems, not just for a season or a generation, but forever. Imagine the solution wasn't a piece of legislation or a diplomatic treaty, but something far more tangible, far more primal. A plan written in concrete and steel, on a scale that defies belief. What if you could fundamentally replumb an entire continent, commanding mighty ancient rivers to abandon their natural courses and bend to your will? What if you could conjure vast, shimmering lakes where dry mountain valleys once stood, and command the most arid deserts on Earth to burst into vibrant green life? In the whirlwind of post-war ambition that defined the mid-20th century, this was not the plot of a science fiction novel. It was a very real, meticulously detailed proposal. A $1 trillion blueprint to save America from its own relentless thirst. This is the incredible, almost forgotten story of the most audacious, most colossal, and most fiercely debated engineering project in human history. It is a tale of breathtaking vision and terrifying arrogance. And if you are fascinated by the sheer, unbridled scale of human ambition, the kind of thinking that dares to reshape the very face of our planet, then you have come to exactly the right place. Before we dive into this monumental story, take just a second to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We uncover the world's most incredible forgotten histories and monumental ideas every single week. And trust me, you won't want to miss what we have coming next. To truly grasp a solution of this magnitude, you must first understand the crushing weight of the problem. America's water crisis in the 1950s and 60s was a great paradox, born from its own success. The nation was intoxicated, riding a tidal wave of unprecedented prosperity. The Second World War was a fading memory, the soldiers were home, and the country was in the throes of a historic, explosive boom in both population and production. This was the legendary era of the baby boom. Between 1946 and 1964, an almost unbelievable 76 million babies were born in the United States. Entire suburban communities, with their neat lawns and identical houses, seemed to sprout from empty fields almost overnight. The great industrial machine that had churned out Sherman tanks and B-17 bombers had pivoted with astonishing speed. Now, it was building chrome-finned Cadillacs, revolutionary new washing machines, and televisions that brought the world into the American living room. The nation was growing, building, and consuming at a pace never before seen in history. And all of this explosive growth, all of this life, had a single, insatiable need: water. The statistics tell a stark story. In 1950, the United States was drawing approximately 180 billion gallons of water from its rivers, lakes, and aquifers every single day. A mere decade later, that figure had vaulted to an astonishing 270 billion gallons per day. This relentless, ever-increasing demand drew a stark, invisible line across the map of the country, a line that separated the haves from the have-nots. To the east of this line, water was generally plentiful. But in the vast expanse of the American West, water was more than a resource. It was liquid gold. Sprawling regions like California, Nevada, Arizona, and western Texas are naturally, fundamentally arid. They are lands of relentless sun, rugged mountains, and hardy scrub brush, where rainfall is a rare and celebrated event, and the intense heat relentlessly sucks moisture from the soil and reservoirs. Yet, this dry, challenging landscape was precisely where millions of Americans were flocking, chasing the dream of sunshine, open spaces, and economic opportunity. The population of Arizona alone more than doubled during the 1950s. The central, unavoidable problem was a simple matter of geography. The people were moving to where the water wasn't. And this existential crisis was not confined by national borders. The equally arid northern states of Mexico were battling the exact same demons of drought and scarcity, staring across the newly drawn border at their equally thirsty northern neighbor. To be sure, Americans had already attempted to tame the West's formidable water challenges with some of the most monumental feats of engineering the world had ever seen. The Hoover Dam, an awe-inspiring wedge of curved concrete holding back the immense power of the Colorado River, had been a triumph, creating Lake Mead, the largest and most vital reservoir in the entire country. The Glen Canyon Dam, the Parker Dam, the ambitious All-American Canal that diverted water to make the Imperial Valley bloom. These were all titanic, heroic efforts to capture, store, and redirect every precious drop of water. These dams were more than just colossal water buckets. They were dynamos, their turbines generating vast amounts of clean hydroelectric energy that powered the explosive growth of fledgling cities like Las Vegas and Los Angeles. Yet, even as these concrete titans stood as monuments to human ingenuity, a deep and persistent anxiety gnawed at the minds of the nation's long-term planners. They looked at the soaring population charts and the shrinking water tables and saw an inevitable, catastrophic collision course with reality. The prosperity couldn't last. The American dream, they feared, would one day run dry. This looming question obsessed one man in particular, Ralph M. Parsons. Parsons was not simply a dreamer, he was a master builder, an industrialist who operated on a scale that few could even comprehend. His firm, the Parsons Corporation, had become the go-to company for projects that existed at the very edge of the possible. In the 1950s, his teams had engineered the colossal test stands for the Air Force's new generation of rocket engines, the very platforms that would test the power plants destined to carry America to the moon. He had built Turkey's very first oil refinery from the ground up. He had engineered an entire, highly complex intercontinental ballistic missile launch site at Vandenberg Air Force Base. Ralph Parsons didn't think in terms of individual buildings or simple projects. He thought in terms of vast, interconnected systems, of continental logistics, of legacies that would endure for centuries. He had built his empire on a foundation of high-level government connections and a hard-won reputation for tackling the impossible. And as he stared intently at the maps of North America's water crisis, he wasn't just seeing a problem. He was seeing the opportunity for the single greatest construction project in the history of all humankind. Here's the fundamental, world-altering secret that Ralph Parsons and his engineers understood. North America does not actually have a water shortage. It has a colossal distribution problem. The continent is, in fact, awash with unimaginable quantities of fresh water. The catch? It's all in the wrong place. Deep in the remote, pristine wilderness of Alaska and northwestern Canada, mighty untamed rivers like the Yukon, the Liard, and the Peace River surge with a colossal volume of pure, fresh water, constantly replenished by melting glaciers and abundant rainfall. But their epic journey is, from an engineering perspective, a tragic waste. They flow north and west, thousands of miles through uninhabited land, ultimately dumping trillions of gallons of this priceless fresh water, completely unused, into the frigid, desolate waters of the Bering Sea and the Arctic Ocean. To a mind like Parsons, this was more than an inconvenience. It was an offense against logic, a cosmic engineering flaw that was simply waiting to be corrected. And from this one, simple, revolutionary observation, an idea of almost unbelievable audacity was born. Why not just capture it? Why not build a system to turn those mighty rivers around, to reverse their flow and send that torrent of wasted water south, from the very top of the continent all the way to the bottom? The project was given a name that was as grand and all-encompassing as its vision: the North American Water and Power Alliance, or, for short, NAWAPA. The plan itself was breathtaking in its scope, a meticulous, continent-spanning scheme to re-engineer the hydrology of an entire landmass. The grand operation would begin here, in the vast, silent wilderness near the headwaters of the Yukon River. A series of colossal dams, larger than any ever built, would be erected to block the river's natural, centuries-old path to the sea. The backed-up water would create a new, massive man-made lake, a strategic reservoir so enormous its new shorelines would be clearly visible from orbit. From this critical starting point, the true genius, and perhaps the madness, of NAWAPA would be unleashed. A complex, integrated network of enormous canals, wider than freeways, deep rock tunnels bored for hundreds of miles through solid mountain ranges, and immensely powerful pumping stations would work in perfect concert to lift and redirect this captured torrent of water. The primary engineering goal was to physically hoist the water over the natural mountain barriers of the continental divide, effectively forcing it to flow south instead of its natural course west. As this new, man-made river journeyed south, it would become a liquid artery, joined by still more water. New dams on the Liard and Peace Rivers in British Columbia would capture their flows, adding them to the growing system. The engineers had cleverly designed the entire network of reservoirs to be situated at extremely high elevations. This ingenious design meant that once the immense initial lift was accomplished, gravity itself would do most of the subsequent work, allowing the water to cascade downwards with immense force. This not only dramatically reduced the need for constant, energy-intensive pumping along the route, but also created the potential for generating staggering amounts of clean hydroelectric power at numerous points along the way. The very energy needed to pump the water uphill at the start of its journey would be generated by that same water as it flowed downhill later. It was, in effect, a self-powering, continental-scale water machine. The absolute centerpiece of this entire audacious system was the Rocky Mountain Trench, a vast, remarkably straight geological valley that runs for over 1,000 miles down the spine of the continent. NAWAPA's engineers envisioned transforming this enormous natural feature into a 500-mile-long, 12-mile-wide reservoir, a central storage and distribution artery for the entire project. From this colossal holding tank, the diverted water would finally be injected deep into the heart of the thirsty American West. It would flow into Montana, where a gigantic pump lift system would hoist it into another high-altitude basin, the Sawtooth Reservoir. From there, it would pour through a massive tunnel, bored directly through the solid granite of Sawtooth Mountain, and begin its final, gravity-fed descent. The system would then bifurcate. One massive branch would head east, a lifeline to quench the desperate thirst of Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. The other branch would flow southwest, delivering life-giving water through the parched landscapes of Nevada and California, continuing all the way down to the sun-baked, struggling farmlands of northwestern Mexico. And this was designed to be a true continental alliance, with benefits shared among 3 nations. Canada would not be treated merely as a water donor. A significant portion of the diverted water from the Peace River would be channeled eastward via a new system of canals to stabilize and replenish the Great Lakes. Even back in the 1960s, fluctuating water levels in the Great Lakes were a major and growing concern for the vital shipping and industrial economies of both Canada and the United States. NAWAPA promised to solve that problem permanently, and as an added nation-building bonus for Canada, the plan included a new navigable waterway, nicknamed the Transcontinental Canal, that would link Alberta's inland ports directly to Lake Superior, opening up the heart of the Canadian prairies to global shipping. Mexico, for its part, would receive a transformative infusion of water, enough to nearly triple its total amount of irrigable land, a revolutionary boon for its national food security and agricultural sector. This would be coupled with access to 2 gigawatts of new, clean power. But the grand prize, of course, was reserved for the United States. NAWAPA promised an annual delivery of nearly 78 million acre-feet of new water. It would increase America's total irrigable land by over 60,000 square miles, an area larger than the entire state of Georgia. It would also generate nearly 40 gigawatts of reliable power for the country, enough to light up tens of millions of modern homes. Ralph Parsons confidently predicted the project would boost the national income by $30 billion a year. And remember, that's in 1960s money. In today's terms, that's an annual economic stimulus of over $300 billion every single year, forever. So, how do you actually build a dream this big? The raw numbers are simply mind-bending. The full NAWAPA proposal consisted of no fewer than 369 distinct major construction projects, all to be built concurrently. It would require 200 million sacks of cement, 30 million tons of steel, and 100,000 tons of copper and aluminum. To put that into perspective, That is enough steel to construct the Golden Gate Bridge 100 times over. The Parsons Company estimated that this colossal undertaking would create, both directly and indirectly, 4 million new, well-paying jobs across the continent. And the proposed construction timeline? 30 years. A full generation of American, Canadian, and Mexican workers dedicated to the single greatest construction effort in human history. The first, most obvious question on everyone's mind, from powerful senators in Washington to skeptical engineers in the field, was brutally simple. Was this even possible? Could you actually pull it off? Incredibly, after years of extensive review by US Senate subcommittees and various independent engineering bodies, the consensus was a tentative but astonishing yes. From a purely technical and engineering standpoint, NAWAPA was deemed feasible. The physics worked. The engineering principles, while pushed to an extreme scale, were sound. You really could, with enough resources, divert the rivers of the north and make them flow to the deserts of Mexico. The ultimate challenge wasn't one of engineering. It was a terrifying trifecta of money, politics, and a powerful, unpredictable force of nature that the project's planners had dangerously underestimated: the environment itself. The official price tag, as calculated by the Parsons Company back in 1964, was a staggering $100 billion, to be spent over the 30-year construction timeline. In today's money, that figure inflates to well over $1 trillion. For context, President Eisenhower's entire interstate highway system, arguably the most transformative infrastructure project in American history, cost roughly half that amount. The investment case presented by Parsons was, to put it mildly, wildly optimistic. He claimed the entire $1 trillion plus cost would be fully recouped in just 50 years, thanks to projected sales of water and energy. But this, of course, was a forecast coming from the very man whose company stood to gain the most from the project's approval. The financial and diplomatic risks were astronomical. Convincing 3 separate sovereign nations to commit to a 30-year trillion-dollar funding plan was a recipe for an unprecedented diplomatic nightmare. What would happen if one country's economy fell into recession? What if a newly elected government, hostile to the project, decided to unilaterally back out? The entire continental system could be thrown into chaos, leaving behind a half-finished, multi-billion-dollar ruin scarring the landscape. Yet, despite the terrifying cost, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of NAWAPA captivated the imagination of Washington, D.C. A host of powerful and influential figures lined up to endorse it. Texas Congressman Jim Wright, who would later become Speaker of the House, wrote a book on the coming water famine and called NAWAPA a plan with almost limitless potential if we possess the courage and the foresight to grasp it. Utah Senator Frank Moss became its most vocal and passionate champion in the Senate. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed as if the political will was actually gathering. The Canadian Prime Minister at the time even appeared to be warming to the idea. The massive, continent-sized gears of the great machine were slowly beginning to turn. And then, the 1970s arrived. And with them came the birth of a powerful, revolutionary new force in American public life: the modern environmental movement. And this new movement looked at the grand blueprints of NAWAPA, not as a marvel of progress, but as a blueprint for an ecological apocalypse. They saw a plan that treated the intricate, delicate systems of nature not as a precious web of life to be preserved, but as a flawed machine to be crudely dismantled and reassembled for human convenience. The litany of ecological concerns began at the very source of the project. Diverting the Yukon, Skeena, and other northern rivers would utterly devastate some of the world's most vital and productive salmon runs, destroying the cornerstone of a vast aquatic ecosystem and threatening the ancient cultures of the indigenous peoples who had depended on those fisheries for millennia. The plan to flood the Rocky Mountain Trench, the central artery of the whole system, was envisioned as an ecological catastrophe of almost unimaginable proportions. It would mean drowning a pristine wilderness area the size of a small country, wiping out ancient old-growth forests, critical wetlands, and the unique habitats of countless species of wildlife, from grizzly bears to caribou. It would mean the permanent displacement of the First Nations communities who had called that land home for thousands of years. The project was soon venomously labeled by its growing chorus of critics as the hydrologic Antichrist, a devilish, hubristic plan to kill a continent in order to save a portion of it. In the end, while the thunderous environmental outcry was a critical nail in its coffin, the official cause of death for NAWAPA was written plainly on its astronomical price tag. The dream was simply too big, the cost too high, the risks too great. The boundless, can-do optimism of the post-war era had finally crashed against the hard, unforgiving shores of economic reality and a profound, newly awakened ecological conscience. The great ambitious plan was quietly shelved, its blueprints filed away, a faded, magnificent vision for a future that never was. Yet the ghost of NAWAPA still lingers. The fundamental problem it was designed to solve has not vanished. On the contrary, it has grown far more severe. Today, Lake Mead, once the mighty symbol of America's absolute mastery over water, is a pale shadow of its former self. Its dangerously low levels have revealed a stark, white bathtub ring of mineral deposits high on the canyon walls, a grim testament to decades of overuse and climate change. The Colorado River, the lifeblood of the Southwest, is over-allocated, shrinking, and at the center of intense legal battles. The West is thirstier than ever. And so, the idea of massive interbasin water diversion projects continues to resurface, championed by fringe political groups and desperate futurists who see it as the only long-term solution. The grand, audacious dream of replumbing a continent refuses to die completely. And so, we are left with a deep and fascinating question. Was NAWAPA a brilliant, misunderstood solution, a project of such foresight that we simply lacked the courage to build it? Or was it a monument to breathtaking human arrogance, a potential ecological nightmare that we were incredibly lucky to have avoided? The truth, most likely, lies somewhere in the complex, murky space between those two extremes. But the story of NAWAPA serves as a powerful, enduring reminder that when we dream of changing the world, we must first dare to understand, in all its complexity, the true and total cost of our ambition. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Was this a stroke of unparalleled genius, or a plan for an unmitigated disaster? As always, thank you for watching.